you can lose your children. And let me tell you why. Social workers, their little local agency, their little fiefdom, if you will, their county agency, they get more than $8,000 per head that they take by the federal government. No strings attached by the federal government, by the way. Federal government doesn't say, oh, you have to give certain due process protections. You have to make sure that there's a jury of their peers before you permanently take a child. Oh, no. Federal government just says, basically, you tell me how many kids you've taken. Here's $8,000 per head. And by the way, we'll give you $8,000 for every year you keep those children from the families.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining me. Today's episode was with pro bono attorney Brad Dacus, and he is the attorney and CEO and founder of Pacific Justice Institute. I wanted to have Brad on because it was really important for me to talk about the laws and regulations of public schools, homeschools, and in general about our education system. Brad is somebody who has helped and stood by so many teachers. He's helped so many parents that have had their children taken away from their homes. And this episode was kind of, I wouldn't say kind of, but it genuinely was an eye-opener because it really got me into thinking about how easy it is from Child Protective Services to take away children from their homes. And the incentives behind it blew my mind away, that social workers get an incentive. I mean, we talk about that. We do talk about the public systems. We do talk about the rights of therapists. We do talk about, if we choose to not want to use pronouns. All of that was just amazing. And I loved having him on because he has such knowledge of the law. Brad is definitely someone that is such a high regard to the community of all Americans. Definitely need to know about him, be aware about him and his work. He is such a support system. He's a phenomenal attorney, and I'm very honored that he accepted my invitation and was on. We do talk a lot about public school laws and homeschooling laws, and what grounds is there to take your child away from home, and how to protect yourself, how to protect your family. And I think you guys are going to really find this episode intriguing and an eye-opener. So thank you for watching and supporting.
Brad, thank you so much for joining me today. I have to say that it's such an honor to be in your presence. I admire your work. I admire you as a human being, and I'm very grateful that you accepted my invitation and are with me today.
Oh, thank you. It's a pleasure.
Absolutely. Let's start with this important question. I want to know what brought the thought to the Pacific Justice Institute. How was this beautiful institute born?
Yeah, it's a great question. It all started when I graduated from law school, and John W. Whitehead, the founder of the Rutherford Institute, asked me to open an office for him in California on the West Coast and coordinate litigation in 14 Western states. I said yes after praying and realizing I had to trust in the Lord and not myself. And God blessed it. And I developed a huge team of attorneys, network of attorneys in little towns all throughout the Western United States. Then after 5 years, the organization contracted, closed down its regional office, including mine. It offered to have me head up the public affairs office to promote me to be the face of the organization for all media, all radio, television, everything. Also, I testified before Congress, have a higher salary. It all looked so perfect. And I said yes, of course. So I didn't have to pray about this. And then I had insomnia. I couldn't sleep, still couldn't sleep. Next night, still couldn't sleep. I went, shoot, I got to pray about it.
Uh-huh.
And when I did, the question that God brought to my mind right away was, what desires has God put on my heart? And the desires put on my heart was not to necessarily be in the media or testify for Congress. It was to make sure that people got the help that they needed where it was needed the most here on the West Coast at the time. So I said, okay, God, I'll do it on several conditions. I need to have free office space donated in Sacramento, free computer system, keep me on the radio stations for free. We have to be in the black in just 3 months, and I'm never going to charge anyone. And God came through on all of them, and some of them in miraculous ways. And the Pacific Justice Institute was born. It was back in 1997. Now, fast forward, we have not just one office that was donated. We have a donated office space for 36 offices, what we have now coast to coast in 26 states. And most of it has free utilities as well. And it's just really encouraging to see how God has lifted it up and all the work that we're able to do and accomplish, all without charge. We now have 245 cases in active litigation coast to coast. And it's just such a joy to see how God has really blessed it and how many people, thousands of people that we help every year without charge.
That's beautiful. I love that. It's God's work to do work like this. It's like, I feel like sometimes we are placed into certain situations that it's our calling. Do you feel like this was your calling? This is what you were born to do?
Yeah, originally it was interesting. I was going to be a pastor and go to seminary. And
Really?
yeah, I was going to be a pastor, go to seminary. And after getting my degree in finance, I was working a couple of years and prayed about it. And the more I sought the Lord on it, the stronger my desire was to go to law school. Didn't exactly make sense because I wanted to do God's work, but I had a strong desire to go to law school. So I thought, well, this must be a calling. Doesn't always make sense. So I went ahead and went to law school. But the irony is that I actually do more preaching in different churches than I ever would have had I probably gone to seminary. So like this upcoming Sunday, I'm going to be preaching at a church in West Sacramento, and so they have these things scheduled. So that I'd say overwhelming majority of my Sundays, I'm guest preaching at churches, preaching from the Word, applying the Word, expository, verse by verse, to what we're facing today and the challenges of the day. And of course, I always love to share the gospel message of hope in Christ as well at the end of every service. So it's really, I got the best of both. I get to preach, and at the same time, on Monday through Friday, and I get to be involved in making sure that everyone's getting help across the country when it comes to religious freedom, parental rights against the government, and the sanctity of human life, all three areas that are very dear to my heart.
Absolutely. And I love that. One question that I want to ask you is, can you share a recent case that highlights the core mission of Pacific Justice Institute?
Yeah, there are so many. But I'll just give you one that comes to my mind.
Please.
Down in Southern California, there's a church, I think it's Foothills Christian Church, and it's a wonderful church. Well, they have in addition to a private school, they also have a preschool. And like all preschools, it's licensed with the state. It has to be under California law. Well, the state of California has basically shut them down, and they've brought in a SWAT team. It was like a SWAT type kind of team with bulletproof vests and guns. And the reason they did is initially someone blew the whistle that a few of the kids were not wearing masks because their policy was to do what parents wanted, not what the state necessarily wanted or people wanted. And that was a very smart thing to do because we now know that those little ones, 3-4 year olds wearing masks, it's actually not good for them to be wearing those masks for their both psychologically, development wise, as well as health wise. But nonetheless, that's what sort of triggered the whole thing. And then they came in there, guns ablazing, if you will, not shooting, but
I get you.
Storking, just invading the place we would argue, without the proper warrant, without they went through private files. They also ordered them no longer to sing religious songs. They could not compel any little preschooler to sing a religious song, or for that matter, to hear Bible stories. Well, this is a Christian private preschool at a church. Really? So that's what the government of the state of California, Governor Gavin Newsom, he was behind this move and this legislation supporting it. So we at Pacific Justice, we've taken it on, and we're defending them, and then we've taken it on, and now we have it up on appeal. That's just a classic example of religious freedom, also mixed with parental rights against a very totalitarian government that we have in California, and also, for that matter, presently at the federal level with this administration. There's so much that's taken place that we at Pacific Justice have taken on. One was when they shut down the churches in California and other blue states. Red states quickly opened up. They said, if we're going to open up restaurants, we're going to open up churches. Makes total sense. Well, not if you live in a state like California. They open up restaurants and pot shops and liquor stores. Well, but they kept those churches shut down and those synagogues shut down. Well, we at Pacific Justice Institute, we went in and filed a lawsuit in federal court. We took it rapid fire all the way to the Supreme Court. And Supreme Court, after just 3 days of deliberation, granted an emergency injunction, ruling 6-3, ordering the governor of California to open those churches and synagogues immediately. And now we've also been defending people in the workplace being persecuted because of their faith, whether they didn't want to take a controversial vax shot, or they didn't want to compromise their faith and say pronouns affirming something that's not true, something that to them is blasphemous against the Creator. So we're taking these on and representing them. And then, of course, public schools, with teachers lying and hiding things from parents. We have lawsuits we filed against that in New Jersey and other places. And it's just, pro-life counselors being criminally prosecuted by the Biden administration, facing up to 10 years behind bars. A pastor with 3 kids and a wife, peacefully praying there on the grounds of an abortion clinic, didn't touch anyone, didn't block, up to 10 years behind bars. Really? That's like second-degree homicide, second-degree murder. It's third-degree homicide murder. So this is insane. Well, this is the Biden administration, the Department of Justice, has been targeting pro-lifers, peaceful, wonderful people doing great work, while ignoring the violence of mobsters and criminals who have come across the border. It's just been insane. So we at Pacific Justice, needless to say, have been very, very busy over the last several years in particular.
I'm sure. God has been removed from many people's homes. It has been removed from schools and other wonderful areas that children need to be in. As a man of faith and a prestige attorney, what do you think we as Americans did wrong to be in this situation?
Well, I think part of it was complacency, acquiescence. Maybe we were too busy, earning a living and the American dream, if you will, that we started allowing things to chip away. Part of it, of course, were appointments by the different presidents since from FDR forward that started chipping away from religious freedom, really chipping away from respecting the Constitution based on its strict construction, its original intent, what it says, what it meant to say. So that has been a lot of what we're talking about. And then the good news, of course, the great news is what happened in 2016. A miraculous election outcome in the eyes of most political consultants and experts resulted in a major revolution in our federal courts, starting with the Supreme Court. We now have 3 appointments to the Supreme Court by former President Donald Trump. We think that there'll be possibly 1 to 3 more in his term in the next 4 years. And this resulted in landmark legislation from reversing Roe versus Wade to respecting religious freedom in multiple different facets and ways. Parents' rights, we're going to make even more progress in parents' rights moving forward with our existing legislation and religious freedom moving forward. So we're very positive on the looking forward, but looking backward, without question, we allowed things to really go downhill, and a lot of it is in education, the public schools without school choice, without parents having any say. The teachers union, driven by people from the far left, have been brainwashing our children very, very effectively. More than 1 in 4 children in public high schools today identify as being gay, lesbian, transgender, bisexual, binary, or queer, something in that spectrum. That's catastrophic in so many ways. And that's because of the breakdown taking place there. Also, the breakdown of the family unit has also opened the door for a lot of confusion and a lot of mistrust for marriage. And then this the latest transgender movement has just been so catastrophic and has taken so many victims, and has caused me to term public schools today, as a general rule, with some exceptions, as a general rule, they become spiritual death camps for our children, as well as physical problems as well. So that's where we are. But moving forward, we at Pacific Justice are very optimistic.
Yes, absolutely. Since we're on that topic, how do you view the role of parents in shaping educational content in public schools?
Well, first off, the first role I believe they should have is to pull their children from public schools as soon as possible if they can do it. I'm not saying, thus saith the Lord, God has commanded all parents to do this. I'm not going to say that. I don't know every family situation. I don't know every single public school or public school teacher. But that's the first step, whether it's homeschooling, private schooling, or working with churches as we've done to start church homeschool co-ops. We're helping churches across the country do this. They're easy to do. They're simpler than private schools, very affordable, and helps just about any family who wants to homeschool per se, not to have to feel like they're doing it alone. And so that's number one. Number two, my wife and I wrote a book called Reclaim Your School. It's available, a free download on our website. And it talks all about how parents can have a positive impact on public schools by not only just volunteering to be teachers' aides, but also empowering their children, monitoring what's going on in the schools, and also, working with their church to do on how they can effectively have outreach in public schools. There's so many things they can do. They can also utilize what we have, a valuable tool called opt-out forms that we've customized for I think almost all the 50 states across the country. They can go and download it for free on our website. It's also in that book, Reclaim Your School. But they can download it for free. They can fill it out, check the boxes, send it to the school district and to the school principal and their teachers, putting them all on notice. I don't want my child exposed to this, and I want to be notified about that. It's not a foolproof. In California, states like California, legislation by the Democrats was passed that have gutted a lot of its effectiveness, so children can still be exposed to radical LGBTQ transgender propaganda. But it does give some protection, and we encourage all parents to utilize that if they have their child in a public school anywhere in the United States today. And it's available free on download right now on our website for free, pji.org, pji.org. They can also sign up to get our free e-newsletter, The Legal Insider. It keeps people updated on what's happening in our many cases all across the country at pji.org.
Yes, and I'm going to link all of that for anyone wondering, by the way. I know people are going to message me about that. I preach to the choir. I think that pulling, children out of school and homeschooling them and private schools are an essential, definitely. But what do you think? Is that going to help the situation with all these propagandas, or is that going to make it worse?
That's a great question, because many people say, if we take all our kids out, we're just surrendering the public schools.
That's
well,
right.
And that's one of the biggest arguments. Well, I say this, we need to save as many children as we can from what I call the spiritual death camps. A child today, what public schools have become too much for a child to be expected to survive spiritually, the way schools are today, especially in states like California, or even in school districts like the Dallas Independent School District, Houston School District, Atlanta. Even large city school districts in red states. I think we should pull out, but at the same time, we can't forget, even if we pull out our children, we can't forget the children in public schools. So all it takes is just a few kids in a public school, for example, to start a Bible club. Just a few kids to, with that Bible clubs, have an outreach, evangelism outreach week, working with ministries such as decisionpoint.org. It's a wonderful ministry. My wife had actually helped get it started from the beginning. They have full revival rallies in the school gyms. My wife and I did the very first one in Sacramento, and we talk about it in our book we wrote, Reclaim Your School. But it's now a separate ministry, and it's all over the country, decisionpoint.org. So there's so many things that can practically be done to reach out to the kids that are still there, while at the same time with churches and others working to provide viable alternatives for kids. I tell pastors, I talked to one pastor, he says, our church is getting small and we're all getting old. And, I don't know if any of us are going to be alive 10 years from now. I said, well, that doesn't have to be. He goes, what do you mean? I says, you want your church to grow? You want young people? I said, sure. I said, well, contact decisionpoint.org. they partner with churches like yours, and they help start youth programs. First, doing the outreach week and the outreach through the Bible club that you help start, and then with the kids who come to Christ, they steer them to the church that's there sponsoring them, and the people there in your church can teach Sunday school and can teach help youth programs, and they can even start a tutoring program. They can start a private school or excuse me a homeschool co-op, reaching out to people in the community, and your people in your church that have extra time on their hands can help tutor and monitor things. I mean, there's just so much possibilities out there, even for a church that seemingly is shrinking and dying out, if you will.
Yeah, one thing I always think about is these consequences behind choosing to get your kids out of public school and homeschool them. The CPS is one of them. How involved can they get? Because I'm a new homeschooling mom and I haven't heard anything yet, but these are definitely laws that I want to get into because my audience, majority of them are homeschooling families, new homeschooling families. So question, how involved can CPS get if you're homeschooling your child? Is that considered something where they can get involved with, or they have no right to that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So CPS, we had a case where they went after a homeschooling family in California, alleging that
Did
you can't
they?
homeschool, alleging you can't homeschool unless you're a credentialed teacher. So they raided the house, took the kids. We stepped in, we represented them. In fact, I did this myself personally, and kids were given back to the mother. And we could have sued at that time. The mother decided she didn't want to file a lawsuit against the school district. It's up in Nevada City, California. But then later on, we had another big homeschooling case, and it's very similar facts. We prevailed, and the U.S. and the state Supreme Court of California allowed it to hold as case law. But the reality is, generally speaking, social workers have attacked homeschoolers. Children are more vulnerable of a social worker taking them if they're in a public school than if they're homeschooled. It wasn't always that way. But now social workers are so aggressive in taking children that may have gender confusion, and the family's not willing, the parents aren't willing to encourage it and embrace it, or your same-sex acts with other kids. If the parents aren't willing to do that, then that's grounds to have your child permanently taken from you in states like California, New York, Illinois, Oregon, Washington, the Northeast. It's common. It's happening all the time. So that's why it's actually better for parents to homeschool, because they're not monitored by a progressive or leftist teacher looking for hostile parents after encouraging a child to be gender confused or to delve into gender or sexual confusion. So that said, homeschoolers are still vulnerable, needless to say. And so what they need to do is they need to basically be prepared. Now, we have an free article on our website. It's called 12 Steps to Protect Your Children from CPS. I'm not exaggerating. In every family in America with children under the age of 18 should have that article. It's not long. It's step by step what they need to do to protect their children from being taken. Once their children are taken and they call me, it's too late usually. They've got to go through the system. They're presumed generally guilty until proven innocent. They have a government-appointed public defender, and everything is stacked against them. The children, they don't have their children. They can't bring in their own expert. Oh, no, the government says, no, only our experts. But if parents, before the children are taken, when they get that first call from a social worker, they first knock on their door, they know what to say, they know what to do. They can keep their children usually more than 99% of the time. They will keep their children. They will not be taken. That is how important this article is, 12 Steps to Protect Your Children from CPS, or Child Protective Services. They call it different things in different states, but it's social workers. And they can download that for free from our website, pji.org. Parents are losing children and come from nice suburban neighborhoods, safe neighborhoods, people say, oh, we're not going to lose our children. That's for those deadbeat folks who are on drugs and alcohol in the inner
Yeah.
city, and where the dad's behind bars and the mom's a prostitute. Or no, this is a threat. It doesn't matter who you are, no matter how nice of a neighborhood you live in, you can lose your children. And let me tell you why. Social workers, their little local agency, their little fiefdom, if you will, their county agency, they get more than $8,000 per head that they take by the federal government. No strings attached by the federal government, by the way. Federal government doesn't say, oh, you have to give certain due process protections. You have to make sure that there's a jury of their peers before you permanently take a child. Oh, no. Federal government just says, basically, you tell me how many kids you've taken. Here's $8,000 per head. And by the way, we'll give you $8,000 for every year you keep those children from the families.
So this is an incentive, just like vaccine incentives that go to doctors. This is an incentive that goes to social workers from removing children from homes. Is that what I'm saying?
Exactly. It's a big incentive, a money-based incentive. And that's why I'm hoping that this new Congress and new White House and Senate will address this issue and say in the future, frankly, I think they should say, you know what? We're not funding government taking kids anymore. States, you fund it and you prioritize accordingly. That's what needs to happen. And if they don't, alternative number 2 is they need to say, you know what? From now on, states, in order to get money per child that you take, you must meet these due process requirements. You have to prove not just a preponderance of the evidence, you must show by clear and convincing evidence. In a court of law, you must give the parents a jury of their peers if the parents request it. You must have due process. You must give them a speedy trial. You must give them their rights, just like you do criminals. You give them their Miranda rights. You need to read to parents their rights and make them aware of their rights, to not have to just sign documents waiving their rights and waiving authority over their children. There's so much that needs to be done on that level. But so if governments are going to keep giving money out, they need to at least ensure that some basic due process actions are taken. Right now, the best state in the country to raise your child safely is Oklahoma, believe it or not. They have actually, they're actually the most progressive in addressing these issues of abuse by social workers, and making sure that there's really adequate due process protection of families not losing their children wrongfully.
What I want to understand is, on what grounds do they take children away from parents? What you're saying, you don't have to be a prostitute or a drug addict or a criminal. They can just come in and just take your kids? I mean, on what grounds though?
It's actually very easy. So here's what the protocol is. Say a teacher talks to a child, and the child says, you know, Miss Jones, I really, say it's a girl, Jill, and she says, I really feel like I'm a boy. Can you call me Jimmy? The teacher, many public school teachers, not most, would say, oh, yes, I affirm you as a boy. Yes, you're now Jimmy. And then she'll call the social workers, and the social workers will talk to the girl and say, do your parents, will they approve of this? Oh, no, they won't. I know they won't. They might even spank me, or they will be real upset. Oh, they will. They're not going to affirm you. They're not going to encourage it. Okay, we'll take you. We'll make sure you're put in protective care. They take the child, say 11-year-old girl. I mean, this is not hypothetical. This is real. This is real stuff.
Yeah.
They take the child. They put the child in a foster home, often with either like a gay family, a transgender couple, and the parents don't see their child again. And that's not unusual. If your child has gender confusion, the odds are you will lose your child. And many parents don't even find out they have any kind of gender confusion until after the child's taken. And a lot of this, quote, gender confusion, it's encouraged. It's initiated, the thoughts of it, by the public schools. Hollywood is not helping either. They're Disney and other networks they're encouraging it. They're creating it. But it's very, very dangerous. So public schools have become very, very dangerous to children. Whether, a child, by the way, who is solidified in their confusion, thanks to government schools and the indoctrination that they have, generally speaking, that combined, of course, with sexual child abuse and things like that can also be contributory. Lack of, proper gender bonding, et cetera. But if this is encouraged and solidified, particularly by public school, then that child's suicide risk increases not 200%, no, by 1,200%. 12 times the risk of committing suicide if they're confirmed and encouraged in this area. Now, the public schools, the teachers union, they say, well, that's because society is not affirming them and encouraging them. No. Studies show that a child is just as likely to commit suicide if they're in a very progressive community like San Francisco than if they're in a conservative community like a small town in East Texas. It's an internal issue. It causes suicide because it does not resolve the confusion that a child's facing.
Brad, can you give us a little bit of details of what teachers face that are not gender affirming in schools? What are the consequences? I mean, I know that you've helped a few teachers, not a few, a lot of hundreds, to be correct here. You were on Tucker Carlson with I forgot her name, Jessica, was it?
Mm-hmm.
One of your, and you guys were talking about how she was fired, and
Right.
She was fired because she was standing up for what was right. So what are
Right.
some of the consequences that teachers face? I know you talked about this on Tucker's show.
Well, the consequences that they face, particularly in leftist, Democrat-controlled areas and school districts and school boards, is nothing less than losing their jobs.
Mm-hmm.
They're being ordered, for example, in California, a public school teacher has to basically confirm and encourage a child's gender confusion. If the child expresses that they have such confusion or aren't sure of things, and they get away with it, they're protected by state law. Even a conservative school board run by parents is now, by state law, is prohibited from punishing any teacher who secretly grooms a child into gender confusion. Right now in New Jersey, on the other side of the country, the Attorney General there pronounced that all teachers have to not only use pronouns that violate their conscience, and every good teacher should violate their conscience to encourage any confusion in any child, much less confusion that results increases their likelihood of suicide by 1,200%. So that's number one. But the Attorney General says all public school teachers also have to lie to parents, to conceal, to cover it up if a child has gender confusion. And then the child commits suicide, and they say afterwards, oh yeah, by the way, forgot to tell you, or couldn't tell you the child had gender confusion. The parent could have gotten counseling, could have got the child the real support to address the underlying cause, whether it was sexual child abuse by a stranger or who knows what. This is the reality of what teachers, the minority of teachers, the good teachers, the ones that have a conscience, that really truly care about children. This is what they're facing, and that's why we at Pacific Justice Institute have made a pledge to defend every single teacher that wants to respect the rights of parents and appreciates and truly cares for children. We'll defend them without charge in these situations all across the country, coast to coast. We have an office in Miami, Atlanta, Delaware, Boston, Philadelphia, Chicago, Dallas, many places all across the country. And we're ready to stand by our work very uniquely to make sure that everyone gets help. That's sort of our hallmark, by the way. We don't just cherry pick like other organizations. They just cherry pick a few high profile cases. We work hard to make sure that everyone gets help, that no one's left on the side of the road without charge. That's what we do at Pacific Justice Institute.
And what does this process look like for the teachers? I wonder, is this a long process, like, going to court and dealing with all these, laws? And I mean, is this a draining process for teachers? I just want to know, because there's a lot of teachers that are struggling. I know a few that are refusing to go back. They're just tutoring right now because of this issue, particularly our tutor. She's phenomenal, but she's reluctant to go back because she, is protecting the truth. He's like, if I go back, I'm going to be, affirming all these confusions, and I don't want to be placed in that situation.
Right. Well, we give direct counsel to teachers in this situation and how they can work around it. they need to, first off, assuming they have a hostile school district, a hostile principal, first off, they can contact the parents. They can, assuming that they're not bound by state law like California from doing so, potentially, they can let the parents know, find out where the parents are at. Most parents would not say that's a good thing. Most parents say, this is terrible. We don't want to encourage our child to be confused. That's so harmful, medically, psychologically, risk of suicide.
Yeah.
So, but even if they have hostile parents, here's the different ways around is first the parent, if it's a school, she can say, well, look, you are registered based on your birth certificate as this gender. I'm going to refer to you as that gender and that name. If she's told she can't, if the parents say no and the school district says no, you have to refer the other name. Then the other alternative is a teacher can use the last name of all the children in the class. She says, I'm going to do something different. Instead of just using your first name, I'm going to use your last name. Last names are unique, and there's something that you should be proud of, and they have different history about you. It says a lot about you, and I'm going to use your last name and break things up, and so that's what I'm going to do. So the teacher uses the last name, avoids any pronouns, and then if that's not good enough, then we at the Pacific Justice Institute think the parent has in a very strong position for us to file a lawsuit on their behalf and represent them. We think we would prevail in these cases as a general rule across the country. So, but it first takes teachers knowing their rights. They should go to our website, learn about their rights, and at the same time contact us if they're in that situation as soon as possible.
Brad, what are some of the consequences of not using pronouns? Like if we don't want to use pronouns, are there consequences? Can we talk about those a little bit?
Sure.
Are there,
yeah,
sued for things like that?
Yeah, well, it depends on the policy, the state you're in and the school board and the so California, a teacher could lose their job potentially, especially if they have a school district that doesn't want to work with them, and the school district is obstinate and says you have to use pronouns.
So
you can't just avoid using them.
They're licensed to teach if they're not utilizing a student's pronoun.
Depending on the state they live in, that's very true. That's the position of the teachers union. And by the way, teachers don't have to pay a penny to the teachers union. They have a right under both federal law, under Title VII, but even under case law, Supreme Court case law, they have a right to not pay any dues to their union at all. And nor should they if they have a conscience, as far as I'm concerned, in not wanting to support the evil and the wickedness that the teachers union, the NEA, supports with regard to the evil that they bring into the public schools. It just floors me how I can see a teacher, professing to be a committed Christian, attending church, whatever, and at the same time giving money to fund the evil destruction of children with radical curriculum that goes totally against the conscience of anyone who, as I call, a true believer. That's why I encourage teachers to really, pray about it and examine their heart and conscience before they become a part of a union. But anyway, that's something that we're looking at in the way of consequences. They can lose their jobs, and it's very real, and it all depends on the state they live in, the school board, whether it's one controlled by the teachers union, which more than 85% are in the United States, and even then, do they have a principal that's willing to work with them and help them accommodate their convictions and their faith by letting them use, say, the last name of the children in the class. They don't want to do just the last name of the one child. They should do all the children in their class last names, or just avoid using pronouns at all and only say their name.
Do you work with any clinicians, therapists particularly? Do you have cases with therapists that are in similar situations like teachers, like about to lose their licensure for not using pronouns or anything like that?
Yeah, actually, I had a case out of Texas a number of years ago, and I personally flew in and took on the case myself because I'm licensed not only in California but also in Texas. And we didn't have an office in Texas at the time. Now we have two attorneys there in Texas on staff. But I went ahead and defended this psychologist who was being sued. In fact, he was having his license challenged before the Texas Board of Licensors for, I forget the exact name, but that's what they do. And he was being attacked by someone out of state that saw his website, the fact that he gave counseling to people who were struggling with gender confusion and the like. And the state of Texas was on the brink of taking his license from him. This is the state of Texas. Oh, because he was engaging in counseling. It's either for someone who was gender confused or people who wanted counseling regarding same-sex attraction. And they said, "Oh, this is terrible." And I went right into court. I mean, I went right before that commission. I made it very clear. I said, via state law and the Constitution and federal law, there's no grounds you have to remove his license for providing counseling that is requested and sought after by an adult client. This is their right. He has every right to do so in accordance to the faith and convictions of his client. And if you do decide to take his license, then we at Pacific Justice Institute are going to challenge this in federal court and are going to take this all the way to the United States Supreme Court if necessary, where I'm very confident we will win. I says you cannot allow ideology to trounce upon the constitutional rights of counselors to provide the counseling and therapy requested and needed, assessed by their client, by their counselor in the state of Texas. Now, there's some intolerant, bigoted states like California and New York that have banned counseling for people who have same-sex attraction and want to understand the underlying reason, or even gender identity issues. It's actually banned. Governor of California would just as soon have people commit suicide, apparently, than allow them to actually address the underlying issues, because there's nothing genetic about it. This is a result of past things, whether it's sexual child abuse.
That's right.
Lack of gender peer bonding with your like gender, could be a lack of a father affirming or conditional
in life difficulties. Severe
there's so many insecurities by just a number of things, and yet these are all things that can be addressed and have successfully been addressed with a qualified counselor in helping the person understanding that. Like a classic example, a girl that was, say, sexually abused. They can often develop a very high negative stigma to the male anatomy, want nothing to do with the male anatomy or people who are male. And therefore, they seek females who are safe, if you will, in their minds, because they've not had the counseling to address the fears and the trauma.
That's right.
That's just one example. Or a male that's been, say, sexually abused by whoever, or the female for that matter. They can say, look, this is so traumatic. I want to become a different person. So they think by changing their gender, their name, how they look, and everything, that they can become a different person to escape this horror, this past. It doesn't work. We know they're not happy, and it's tragic. And yet we have blue states, that prevent people from even having the freedom to get counseling, even though we know statistically what the results are to these individuals as a general rule. So, so they need to encourage their state legislators to do the right thing. Hopefully, we're going to have some positive legislation on a federal level protecting counselors moving forward.
Absolutely. And I'll go even deeper than that. A lot of clinicians are even scared to help their clients with coming to this conclusion, or being very truthful about what's really happened and having them see a bigger picture. There's a lot of fear behind that. And I have a lot of colleagues who have pronouns even in their bios because they're just so afraid. And so it's this fear. As an attorney, what advice do you give therapists that do want to practice truth, but they're very afraid of having their license revoked and taken away? Like, kind of
Yes.
like what's happening with Jordan Peterson.
Right. Right. Yeah. And he's written some great books. That's for sure.
Yes, he
Jordan
has.
Peterson. I've read one of them, and a great guy. So here's what you do. Let's say you're in a hostile state. Let's say you're in California or New York, one of these places, where they say you can't give, corrective therapy or whatever you want to call it, to help someone be able to address and no longer at least be bound by these feelings of either gender confusion or same-sex attraction. And how do you deal with that? Well, what we advise counselors to do is, first off, to have their client in writing sign a statement saying that they understand that the counseling they're receiving is not for the intended purpose of modifying their gender identity or their sexual orientation, and that this will not be the direct focus of this counseling. So they sign that statement.
Legally, we can do that.
Yeah, you can have them say, because you want them acknowledging first. It helps protect the counselor, the psychologist, to have the client sign something like this, where the client is in writing, understanding they are not getting, counseling for the purpose, for the only, as how do we change your gender? How do we change your sexual orientation? Put that in there. Say that is not the purpose of this counseling, and that is not the center focus of this counseling. Then after that's done, the counselor does what a counselor would do anyway, which is find out what is the underlying reason why they have gender confusion, why they have same-sex attraction. What was the issue? What's involved in their past? What has not been reconciled? Was it sexual child abuse, lack of peer bonding, the absence of a father, or a father that was conditional in spending time with this girl only if she did boy things with him, or the mother who only wanted the child to do girl things or dress the child like a girl, which some sick
yeah,
mother.
we see that all the time.
Yeah,
I
it's
think examples are
sick,
true.
and it's often mothers who have a mother partner. Sometimes we see that happen. It just carries on, and it's just very sad. But through the counseling, though, the counselor, they focus on that. That's really what the core issue is, these underlying issues. And then, what happens with regards to the same-sex attraction or the gender identity, that often plays itself out once the real underlying issues are addressed. But that's the approach that I would recommend for a counselor, not to go into saying, okay, we're going to give you the 5 steps of how you can change your gender identity, or here's the 5 steps on how to change your sexual orientation. No. But a good counselor anyway should focus on how did those feelings come, where did it come, that identity come from, and we're going to help you address that. We're going to help deal with those those
not
underlying
be
issues.
afraid of laws and consequences and
Right,
regulations.
and that's the best way of doing it. Some psychologists and counselors have left intolerant, bigoted states like California. That's what's happened. So, but those that are still in California that still have a heart and wanting to help people who want help, who are seeking help, it's very helpful. I don't know of any psychologist or counselor that tries to, indoctrinate or change someone's orientation or gender identity that is not seeking to have that done. It's counterproductive. It can be frustrating. It can, I just don't see that happening. And yet that's the scare stories that are attempted by the left to stigmatize responsible psychologists and counselors who are actually doing the right thing, helping people who want help, who need help, and are ready to get that help.
Absolutely. Brad, going back to, I'm kind of going to steer away from this topic and go back to homeschooling. I think one important question I forgot to ask is what are some laws that parents need to be very mindful of if they're choosing to homeschool their kids or when they are homeschooling their kids? What's like essentials that they need to know?
Yes, great question. And we talk about a number of this is also in our material online at pji.org. But I just right offhand, I can tell you, number one, they need to be familiar with their state laws. States have different requirements and mandates. So in California, if they're going to go it alone, they need to file their own private school affidavit.
PSA,
Uh,
right?
huh? Yeah, their own private school affidavit. Yeah, and with the state, exactly. They need to have some kind of a curriculum program of some kind.
Yes.
They need to keep an attendance of a child, and they need to have some methodology showing grades so that they're testing their child in some way. So you can do this now. Some schools, real trending schools, have different methodologies. That's
Yeah.
fine, but homeschoolers, they need to, that in California, that's what they need to do. Those are just good general principles.
Mhm.
But to have an actual program, social worker finds out that the children can't read and write, and parents just say, well, they'll learn on their own somehow. That's probably, they're probably going to get written up for truancy and lose their children. So,
Yeah.
and then before they ever take their child out of a public school, they need to have something, either the child enrolled in a private school, an actual private school, or file their own private school affidavit. They need to have that done in advance. They can't just pull their kids out and say, yeah, we're going to get this done next month.
Yes.
No, social worker could be called and they could lose their children.
Yeah.
So that's real important. Also, they need to know that, they're going to be under more scrutiny, potentially, at least initially. I encourage parents, if there's any kind of fear of social workers going after them, that they stop corporal punishment, spanking of a child. If they do spank a child, it needs to be not with a belt, but with a paddle with a curved edge. But
Because it is
and
legal to
also,
hit your child in California, right? As long as there's no bruises or marks, you can technically
right. And so
find
that's where, but belts sometimes can make a little red mark. That's just what happens. So
That's
you
what
just
we
gotta,
got growing up, the belt.
yeah, I did too. And I haven't killed or shot anyone. I'm actually a pretty peaceful guy. So,
Either.
but,
And I'm a therapist.
even our founding fathers, by the way, all of them were spanked with a switch or a belt. And,
Yeah.
they turned out very well. In fact, much better than the kids do today. So, of that generation. So I would say that those are some things that parents need to take into consideration if they're homeschooling. Understand they may be under more scrutiny. And also if their children, generally speaking, if they reach the age of 8, 9, or 10, especially 10, I mean, they need to be looking at alternative forms of discipline anyway that are actually probably more effective,
Yeah.
just from what I've read. Now, I remember a friend of mine in college, he was raised in the state of Texas, and he got a whipping when he was 16 for talking back to his mother, and his dad didn't approve of that. And, so he turned out just fine, but we'd have to be sensitive to the
That's right.
stereotypes of the day. And,
Yeah.
and so, but that's
Consequence grows
also
with age.
huh?
Consequence grows with age.
Yeah. And yeah, exactly. And there's great books like How to Have a Good Kid by Friday. If you have a strong-willed child where, you just, nothing seems to work. I highly recommend that book by Dr. Lemon, How to Have a Good Kid by Friday. It's an excellent book, but
It is excellent. I've read that book a few times. There's a lot of great books, but yeah, I agree with you. That consequence definitely needs to grow with age. Spanking a 16-year-old, it's a little much there.
yeah, there's
Very helpful.
especially in today's society. So,
Yeah.
but bottom line, if people want to homeschool, those are just some things that they should do. But I highly recommend them, though, not to go it alone if they can. Be a part of a church
Yeah.
where other parents are homeschooling, and also if they're not a part of a church and they're home, it's also for their safety. I think parents are more likely to have their child taken if they're going it alone rogue and don't have any kind of community support. When
Yeah.
they're part of a church, though, it sends a signal to social workers. Especially when the pastor's wife come to the house when the social worker is there, say,
Mhm.
we're just here as support. They're part of our church. It tells the social worker, you take this child wrongfully, you're going to have an entire church community know about it.
That's
and
right.
there's going to be ramifications. So I've gotten many families, parents who don't go to church, to be a part of a church, just as a part of a defensive measure to keep from losing their children from social workers. It really makes a lot of sense. Even if they're atheists, it's just a smart thing to do. And who knows? Stats show that faith actually results in children making wiser decisions, less
Yes.
likely to get pregnant, less likely to drop out of school, do drugs, etc. Not a bad thing.
Not at all. Have you ever heard of a homeschooling program called Abeka?
Oh yes, I've heard great things about it. It's one
Yeah,
of many out there that are just doing excellent
that's
work.
right. Yeah, we are enrolled with Abeka, and their Christian Bible study is just phenomenal. That's like the first class that 8 in the morning my son logs into, and their prayer, it's just so beautiful, and it teaches just wonderful values and morals. And so
Yeah, and
one's out
one
there.
one thing I do want to warn parents, so especially if they're homeschooling, and that is this: a lot of them are now being victimized by the internet. Parents may put, filtering on their internet. They need to have filtering, obviously, but it
Yes,
doesn't filter ideas. So I encourage parents, if they allow a child on the internet, not to have it in their bedroom, only in the kitchen, not on with earplugs. It needs to be so that parents can hear exactly what they're listening to at all times.
that's right.
And also, I encourage parents not to let their children have cell phones. Instead, give them flip up phones where they can make phone calls, they can text, but not cell phones, because that allows them at school to have access to all kinds
That's
of things that it can just really confuse and really hurt children. It's the studies show this, and so parents need to really be proactive like never before. Homeschooling is not a safety measure like it used to be. Parents need to be very proactive, and I encourage them to go through all the measures they can to protect their children when it comes to the internet access via a laptop, or a cell phone.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. Brad, thank you so much for today. It was such an awesome conversation. I loved that we covered homeschooling and public schools and counselors. I love your ideas. I love the fact that you know law so well, and you're such a helpful individual for people out there. And you're a man of faith, which makes it 100 times better. So thank you.
Well, thank you, and I appreciate your podcast and the privilege to participate. Thank you again.
Absolutely.